Chapter 7: The Pakistan Army and Democracy, Domestic Pressures and International Constraints. Why does the Pakistan Army play such a dominant role in the country's democracy?
Because the army is not just a defense institution in Pakistan, it is the most powerful political actor. From the beginning, weak civilian institutions and constant security concerns gave the army space to dominate politics. Rizvi argues that both domestic pressures and international factors reinforce this role.
Let's start with the domestic pressures. What are they?
Domestically, Pakistan has faced weak political parties, corruption, ethnic divisions, and frequent instability. Whenever civilian governments appear incapable of governing effectively, the army steps in as the savior. This constant weakness of democracy provides justification for military involvement.
So the army presents itself as a stabilizer.
Exactly. The military claims that without its intervention, Pakistan would collapse into chaos. For example, coups by Ayub Khan, Zia-ul-Haq, and Musharraf were all justified as necessary to save the state. The effect is that people often accept military dominance, seeing it as more disciplined compared to civilian corruption.
But how do ethnic and regional issues feed into this?
Federal tensions, like those in East Pakistan, Baluchistan, and Sindh, have often been used to justify central control. The army, dominated by Punjab, has presented itself as the guardian of national unity, but this approach also alienates smaller provinces, deepening resentment instead of resolving it.
And what about political parties?
Their role is crucial. Instead of uniting against military interference, parties often turn to the army for support against rivals. This makes democracy weaker because civilian elites treat the army as a power broker rather than building their own strength. The effect is a cycle of dependency where the military never loses relevance.
Let's shift to international constraints. How do global factors empower the army?
Internationally, Pakistan's strategic location has been a blessing for the army's power. During the Cold War, the U.S. saw Pakistan as an ally against communism and provided military aid. During the Afghan Jihad in the 1980s, the army became the main channel for Western funding. After 9/11, the war on terror again made the army Washington's key partner. Each time, foreign aid and recognition strengthened the military while bypassing civilians.
So the world prefers dealing with generals?
Yes, because generals are seen as more reliable and capable of delivering on security matters. Civilians are often viewed as unstable or corrupt. This external preference gives the army legitimacy, resources, and confidence to dominate at home.
How do these international ties affect democracy?
Negatively. When foreign aid flows through the army, civilian governments lose leverage. They cannot claim full control over foreign policy or security. The effect is lopsided governance, where the military dictates terms in critical areas, leaving civilians with little authority beyond routine matters.
Can you give an example of this dynamic?
Take U.S.-Pakistan relations after 9/11. Washington worked primarily with General Musharraf, not the parliament. Billions of dollars in aid were channeled to the military. This reinforced the army's political dominance and sidelined democratic institutions at a crucial time.
Does Rizvi argue that the army always prefers direct rule?
Not necessarily. The army has learned that direct rule attracts criticism, both at home and abroad. Instead, it often prefers indirect influence through hybrid regimes, where civilians are in office but the army controls key decisions. This way, the military enjoys power without the burden of full responsibility.
How does this hybrid model work in practice?
Civilians handle day-to-day governance, but on issues like India, Afghanistan, nuclear policy, and relations with the U.S. or China, the army decides. Intelligence agencies also influence elections, political alliances, and media narratives. The effect is a controlled democracy, where real sovereignty rests with the military.
How does the public respond to this arrangement?
Public opinion is divided. Many Pakistanis admire the army for its discipline and patriotism, especially when compared with corrupt politicians. But others resent its constant interference, arguing that it prevents democracy from maturing. This tension keeps the military powerful, as it can play both roles, protector and manipulator.
What about the economic angle?
Military dominance also extends to the economy. Through defense budgets and military businesses, the army secures vast resources. This financial independence allows it to resist civilian oversight. The effect is imbalance. While ordinary citizens face economic hardship, the military's institutions thrive.
Does Rizvi suggest any way out of this cycle?
Yes, but he is cautious. He suggests that true civilian supremacy requires stronger political parties, transparent governance, and independent institutions. Internationally, foreign powers must also engage with democratic governments, not just the generals. Without these changes, the cycle will continue.
So, what is the main argument of this chapter?
Rizvi argues that the Pakistan army dominates democracy because of two reinforcing forces: domestic weakness and international support. At home, weak parties and instability make military intervention attractive. Abroad, Pakistan's strategic value brings aid and legitimacy directly to the army. Together, these pressures keep democracy fragile and incomplete.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's future?
It means Pakistan will likely remain a hybrid state unless civilians reform themselves and international actors stop relying only on generals. Without these changes, the army will continue to shape politics, making democracy conditional and limited rather than full and stable.
Chapter 8. The Role of Islamist Parties in Pakistan. Why do Islamist parties matter so much in Pakistan's politics?
Because Pakistan was founded in the name of Islam, and religion remains central to its identity, Islamist parties claim to be the guardians of that identity. Even though they rarely win large numbers of seats, their influence on law, policy, and public opinion is much greater than their electoral strength.
Which parties are we talking about here?
The main ones are Jamaat-e-Islami, Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, JUI, and more recently groups like Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, TLP. Each has a slightly different orientation. Jamaat is more ideological and organized, JUI is rooted in madrasa networks, and TLP mobilizes around blasphemy and street power.
Do these parties have a long history?
Yes, very long. Jamaat-e-Islami was founded even before partition, while JUI also dates back to early religious movements. They opposed the Muslim League initially, but after Pakistan was created, they positioned themselves as defenders of Islamic law. Over time, they became important actors in shaping the constitutional framework.
How did they shape Pakistan's constitution?
Their pressure ensured that Islam became central to the state. The Objectives Resolution of 1949 declared sovereignty belongs to Allah, not the people alone. Later, the 1973 Constitution required that no law contradict Islam. These clauses were pushed strongly by Islamist parties. The effect was long-term. Even governments not led by Islamists had to accommodate their demands.
But electorally, they don't seem that strong. Why is that?
That's correct. Islamist parties usually win only 5 to 10% of the national vote. Most Pakistanis prefer mainstream parties like PMLN, PPP, or PTI. However, Islamists have street mobilization power and influence over culture, education, and morality. Their real strength lies in shaping the environment in which other parties operate.
Can you give an example of this indirect influence?
Take the Hudud ordinances under Zia-ul-Haq. They were passed under pressure from Islamist groups. Or consider blasphemy laws, which have been strengthened due to Islamist agitation. Even mainstream leaders avoid reforming these laws for fear of backlash. The effect is that Islamists set boundaries for national debate.
What about their role under military regimes?
Very significant. Military rulers often used Islamist parties to gain legitimacy. Zia-ul-Haq openly allied with Jamaat-e-Islami and JUI during his Islamization drive. Musharraf allowed the MMA alliance, a coalition of Islamist parties, to rule Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Baluchistan in the early 2000s. The military uses them as partners when convenient, but also restrains them when they get too strong.
How do Islamist parties connect with global movements?
Many have links beyond Pakistan. Jamaat-e-Islami has ideological ties to movements in South Asia and the Middle East. JUI has links through Deobandi madrasas, some of which supported the Afghan Taliban. This international connection gives them resources and networks, but it also brings scrutiny, especially after 9/11.
How did 9/11 and the War on Terror affect these parties?
It created both opportunity and challenge. On one hand, U.S. intervention in Afghanistan allowed Islamists to mobilize anti-American sentiment. On the other, global pressure forced Pakistan to regulate madrasas and control extremist groups. Islamists gained popular sympathy, but lost some operational freedom.
What about new players like TLP?
TLP is a game changer. Unlike older Islamist parties, it mobilizes ordinary citizens, especially urban poor, around emotional issues like blasphemy. Its massive street protests have forced governments to surrender to demands. Even though TLP has few parliamentary seats, its street power shakes the state. The effect is instability and shrinking space for liberal voices.
Do Islamist parties contribute to governance when in power?
Their record is mixed. When the MMA ruled KP in the early 2000s, they focused on moral policing rather than improving services. They tried to pass laws enforcing Sharia, but struggled with basic governance. This limited their appeal as ruling parties, though it reinforced their identity as defenders of Islam.
How do ordinary Pakistanis see these parties?
Many respect them for religious credibility, but hesitate to vote for them when it comes to managing the economy or state affairs. Voters want Islamic values, but also jobs, electricity, and security. This gap between ideology and performance limits Islamist parties electorally.
Do they still matter in the long run?
Very much so. They shape Pakistan's ideological environment. Politicians from other parties cannot ignore religion in their campaigns or policies. Even PTI, which presented itself as modern and reformist, used Islamic rhetoric heavily. The effect is that Islamists, even with few seats, set the red lines for national politics.
And what does Zaman's main argument in this chapter?
He argues that Islamist parties matter less as rulers and more as influencers. They rarely win power directly, but they set the terms of debate, influence constitutions, and mobilize street power. Their strength is cultural and moral rather than electoral.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's future?
It means Islamist parties will continue to punch above their weight. They may never dominate parliament, but they will keep shaping laws, policies, and public life. As long as religion remains central to Pakistan's identity, these parties will remain powerful actors in its politics.
Chapter 9: Ethnic Movements and National Integration in Pakistan. Why are ethnic movements such an important issue in Pakistan's history?
Because Pakistan is not a monolithic nation. It's a federation of diverse groups: Punjabis, Sindhis, Pashtuns, Baloch, Muhajirs, Saraikis, and others. Each has its own language, culture, and sense of identity. Ethnic movements emerge when these identities feel ignored or suppressed by the central state, which has often promoted a strong, centralized model of nationhood.
Wasn't the idea of Pakistan meant to unite people under Islam?
That was the hope. Religion was presented as the common bond to overcome differences. But in practice, people's ethnic and linguistic identities remained strong. When the state tried to impose uniformity, such as promoting Urdu as the sole national language, it created resistance. The Bengali language movement in East Pakistan is the clearest example, and it eventually led to secession in 1971.
So the first big failure of national integration was East Pakistan.
Exactly. East Pakistan had the majority of the population, yet it was politically marginalized and economically exploited. The imposition of Urdu and denial of Bengali as a national language was the spark, but behind it were deeper grievances of inequality. The effect was catastrophic. When ethnic identity is ignored, unity collapses.
Did Pakistan learn lessons after losing its eastern wing?
Some lessons, yes, but not enough. The 1973 Constitution recognized Pakistan as a federal state with provincial rights. However, central dominance, particularly by Punjab and the military, continued. This fueled new ethnic movements in Baluchistan, Sindh, and later among Muhajirs and Pashtuns.
Let's talk about Baluchistan. Why is ethnic nationalism so strong there?
Balochistan is resource-rich, but remains Pakistan's poorest province. Its gas, minerals, and now Gwadar port benefit the center more than locals. Baloch nationalists argue that their resources are exploited without fair returns. The effect is periodic insurgencies, harsh military crackdowns, and deep mistrust between Baloch society and the state.
And what about Sindh?
Sindh has two dimensions. On one hand, Sindhi nationalism resents Punjabi dominance and central control. On the other hand, urban Sindh saw the rise of Muhajir nationalism through the MQM. Karachi became a battleground of ethnic politics, where Muhajirs demanded recognition of their identity and fair share in resources. The effect was violence, political instability, and frequent interventions by the military.
And how about the Pashtuns?
Pashtun nationalism has historically been strong, rooted in their tribal structure and cross-border ties with Afghanistan. For years, they demanded recognition of their language and culture and greater provincial autonomy. The recent PTM, or Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, is another expression of Pashtun grievances, particularly about military operations in their areas.
Some argue that Punjabi dominance is the real problem. Do you agree?
Yes, to a large extent. Punjab is the largest province by population, and it dominates the military and bureaucracy. This concentration of power makes other groups feel sidelined, whether it's Baloch complaining about resource exploitation or Sindhis about water distribution. The perception is that Punjab benefits most from the federation. The effect is resentment against not just the state, but specifically Punjabi elites.
How has the state tried to deal with ethnic movements?
Mostly through a mix of repression and limited concessions. Military operations have been frequent in Balochistan. Quotas and reserved jobs have been offered to smaller provinces. The 18th Amendment in 2010 gave greater provincial autonomy, but implementation is uneven and mistrust remains.
Did the 18th Amendment make a difference?
It helped. Provinces now control education, health, and some resources. This reduced separatist rhetoric in places like KP. But in Balochistan, where structural inequality is deeper, the amendment has not resolved grievances. The effect is partial success. Federalism is stronger, but not strong enough to erase ethnic divides.
How do ethnic movements affect Pakistan's security?
They complicate it greatly. Insurgencies in Balochistan drain military resources and create instability. Ethnic violence in Karachi affects the economy. Pashtun grievances complicate counterterrorism operations. The effect is that internal divisions weaken Pakistan's ability to project strength externally.
How about the role of political parties?
Parties often represent ethnic bases. PPP is rooted in Sindh, PMLN in Punjab, ANP in Pashtun areas, and MQM in urban Sindh. This gives communities a voice, but it also reinforces ethnic divisions. When national parties fail to integrate diverse groups, ethnic-based politics become stronger.
Are ethnic identities always a threat to national integration?
Not necessarily. Ethnic diversity can enrich democracy if managed properly. Federalism allows different identities to coexist within one state. The problem in Pakistan is not diversity itself, but the failure to give all groups fair treatment. When fairness is absent, ethnic pride turns into separatist nationalism.
Can you give an example of successful accommodation?
Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is a good case. Recognition of its identity through renaming, coupled with more autonomy, has reduced secessionist tendencies. Pashtuns now feel more represented in the federation, though grievances remain. This shows that giving respect and rights works better than repression.
What does Farzana Sheikh conclude about ethnic movements?
She argues that ethnic movements are not just about culture or language. They are about justice and fairness. Groups demand equality in political power, economic resources, and cultural recognition. Pakistan's failure to address these demands fuels disunity. True national integration requires respect for diversity and genuine federalism.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's future?
It means Pakistan's survival as a stable federation depends on how it manages ethnic diversity. If smaller provinces continue to feel excluded, separatism will remain a threat. But if the state embraces federalism and fair resource sharing, ethnic pride can be harmonized with national unity.
Chapter 10: Islamization and its impact on democracy. Why is Islamization considered such a turning point in Pakistan's political history?
Because it reshaped the entire political and legal framework of the state. While Islam had always been central to Pakistan's identity, Zia-ul Haq's Islamicization program in the late 1970s and 1980s institutionalized it in ways that still affect democracy today. Laws, courts, and even education were reoriented to fit a specific religious framework.
Wasn't Islam already part of the constitution before Zia?
Yes, the 1973 Constitution declared Pakistan an Islamic Republic, and the Objectives Resolution had already emphasized sovereignty of Allah. But under Zia, this framework deepened. He introduced Sharia courts, hudud laws, and blasphemy provisions. The effect was that religion became not just symbolic, but an operational tool of governance.
What was Zia's motive in pushing Islamization so strongly?
His main goal was political survival. After toppling Bhutto in a coup, he lacked legitimacy. By using Islamization, he appealed to conservative groups and built alliances with Islamist parties like Jamaat-e-Islami. It gave him a moral cover, portraying military dictatorship as religiously justified.
What did Islamization mean for women and minorities?
Very negatively. The hudud ordinances criminalized adultery and zina in ways that often punished women more than men. Blasphemy laws became stricter, putting minorities at risk of persecution. The effect was a shrinking of civic freedoms and a climate of fear where vulnerable groups lost protection under the law.
What about the role of the judiciary during this period?
The judiciary became a key instrument of Islamization. Federal Sharia courts were created to review laws against Islamic principles. This shifted the balance of power away from parliament. Democracy suffered because elected representatives lost authority to unelected judges interpreting religion.
Did political parties respond to Islamization?
Many parties opposed Zia's dictatorship, but few dared openly resist Islamization. PPP resisted the regime politically, but even it avoided challenging religious laws directly, fearing backlash. Later, democratic governments like Nawaz Sharif's and even Musharraf's avoided rolling back controversial laws. The effect was entrenchment. Once introduced, Islamization became too risky to undo.
Did Islamization influence education and society too?
Absolutely. School curricula were revised to emphasize Islamic identity, jihad, and hostility toward India. Madrasa networks expanded, often with foreign funding, especially during the Afghan jihad. Society gradually internalized stricter religious attitudes. The effect was long-term. New generations grew up with narrower views of religion and politics.
What about the international dimension?
Islamization coincided with the Afghan jihad. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia supported Pakistan in training mujahideen against the Soviets. Islamization provided ideological justification for this jihad. It tied Pakistan's domestic Islamization to global geopolitics, strengthening both the military and religious groups.
How did Islamization affect democracy specifically?
It weakened it on multiple fronts. First, laws gave unelected bodies, the Shariat court and clergy, power over parliament. Second, women and minorities were marginalized, reducing inclusiveness. Third, political discourse narrowed as parties competed to appear more Islamic rather than debating policy. The overall effect was erosion of pluralism, which is the bloodline of democracy.
Did any positive elements come out of Islamization?
Some argue it gave Pakistan a strong Islamic identity, which they see as unifying. But the costs far outweighed the benefits. Instead of uniting, Islamization often divided between sects, genders, and majority versus minorities. It made democracy fragile by prioritizing ideology over citizen rights.
Has any government tried to reverse these policies?
Attempts have been minimal. Musharraf promised enlightened moderation, but never repealed key laws. PPP governments also avoided challenging blasphemy laws, especially after the assassination of Salman Taseer. Political parties fear losing votes or provoking street protests if they touch these laws. The effect is continuity. Islamization remains deeply embedded.
What about the international dimension?
It contributes to perceptions of Pakistan as intolerant and radical. The misuse of blasphemy laws, persecution of minorities, and rise of extremist groups all damage Pakistan's reputation internationally. It complicates relations with the West, even as Pakistan argues it is fighting extremism.
What about the link between Islamization and militancy?
The connection is direct. By promoting jihadist narratives during the Afghan war and embedding them in schools and society, Zia's Islamization laid the foundation for militancy. Groups that later attacked the Pakistani state were once nurtured under this environment. This is one of the most damaging long-term effects on both democracy and security.
So what is the main argument of this chapter?
The International Crisis Group argues that Islamization has had a corrosive effect on democracy. It gave dictators legitimacy, empowered unelected institutions, narrowed political discourse, and weakened protections for citizens. Even though Islamist parties are electorally weak, their ideological influence remains strong because of these laws.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's democratic future?
It means democracy cannot flourish without addressing the legacy of Islamization. Pakistan must balance its Islamic identity with pluralism, equal rights, and parliamentary sovereignty. Unless the state reclaims authority from unelected religious forces, democracy will remain constrained, always vulnerable to manipulation in the name of faith.
Chapter 11. Pakistan's Economy, the Costs of Conflict and Authoritarianism. Why has Pakistan struggled to build a strong and stable economy despite having so much potential?
Because the economy has been repeatedly derailed by two major factors: conflict and authoritarianism. Wars with India, prolonged security tensions, and internal conflicts have drained resources. At the same time, authoritarian regimes, whether military or civilian in style, have prioritized short-term survival over long-term reform. The effect is cycles of growth followed by collapse.
Can you explain how conflict specifically damages the economy?
Of course. Every major conflict shifted resources away from development toward defense. The wars of 1965 and 1971 consumed massive funds that could have gone into education, health, and industry. The Afghan jihad of the 1980s brought dollars, but it also militarized society and encouraged smuggling, drugs, and arms trade. After 9/11, terrorism cost Pakistan more than $100 billion, scaring away investors and crippling trade. The overall effect is an economy permanently on the back foot.
And what about authoritarianism? How does that play into economic decline?
Authoritarian rulers like Ayub, Zia, and Musharraf did achieve periods of growth because they enjoyed foreign aid and could enforce decisions quickly. But the growth was unsustainable. It was concentrated among elites and lacked institutional depth. Once those regimes fell, the economy stumbled. Authoritarianism produced boom and bust cycles instead of consistent progress.
Can you give an example of such a boom and bust cycle?
Ayub Khan's era in the 1960s is a classic case. His policies encouraged industrialization, and Pakistan became a model for development. But the benefits were uneven, creating resentment between East and West Pakistan. Once political instability set in, the economic gains evaporated. Similarly, Musharraf's early 2000s boom, driven by foreign aid during the War on Terror, collapsed when the aid dried up.
So external aid seems to play a big role too.
Yes, aid has been a double-edged sword. It provides short-term relief and fuels growth, but it also discourages self-reliance. Successive governments relied on foreign funds instead of broadening the tax base or reforming institutions. The effect is dependency. Whenever aid stops, the economy faces crisis.
What about democracy? Has it performed better?
Sadly, democracy too has struggled. Civilian governments often face weak institutions, coalition politics, and constant interference from the military. They prioritize survival over reform. For example, instead of fixing taxation, they borrow more. Instead of investing in human capital, they focus on patronage. The effect is fragile democracy and fragile economy reinforcing each other.
How has conflict with India shaped the economy?
Immensely. Military spending remains one of the largest items in Pakistan's budget, justified by the threat from India. This reduces fiscal space for development. Trade between the two neighbors is minimal, even though both could benefit. Hostility with India has also prevented regional economic integration through SAARC. The cost is isolation from a growing South Asian market.
And Afghanistan? How does that factor in?
Afghanistan has been both a burden and an opportunity. Hosting millions of refugees strained Pakistan's resources. Involvement in Afghan wars brought dollars, but also militancy and instability. Transit trade encouraged smuggling, hurting domestic industries. Instead of becoming a hub for Central Asian trade, Pakistan became entangled in conflict.
What role does governance play in all this?
Governance is central. Weak institutions mean policies are not implemented effectively. Corruption drains resources. Bureaucracy resists reform. For example, tax collection remains among the lowest in the world because powerful groups avoid paying. The effect is a narrow revenue base and chronic fiscal deficits.
How does political instability hurt the economy?
Investors hates uncertainty. Frequent changes of government, judicial battles, sit-ins, and street protests create volatility. For instance, the 1990s saw governments changing every 2 years. Investment suffered badly. Similarly, recent years of political turmoil have discouraged foreign investors, while locals prefer to put money into real estate or abroad.
Has Pakistan ever managed sustained growth?
There have been bursts. The 1960s under Ayub, the 1980s with Afghan aid, and the 2000s under Musharraf all saw strong growth. But in each case, growth relied on external factors, aid, remittances, or strategic rents, not on internal reforms. Once the external factor disappeared, growth collapsed.
What are the biggest structural problems today?
3 stand out. 1, low tax to GDP ratio, meaning the government cannot raise enough revenue. 2, poor human capital, with weak education and health indicators. 3, energy shortages, which choke industry and exports. Without addressing these, Pakistan cannot break the cycle.
How has conflict affected trade and investment specifically?
Terrorism in the 2000s scared investors away. Karachi, once a hub, became a symbol of instability. Foreign companies hesitated to enter, and even domestic businesses shifted to Dubai or Malaysia. Trade routes that could connect Pakistan to Central Asia and beyond remained underutilized because of insecurity. The effect was missed opportunities worth billions.
And what about the cost of authoritarian decisions?
Authoritarian leaders often prioritize mega projects for visibility rather than sustainability. For example, Ayub's focus on big dams and industries ignored rural poverty. Zia emphasized Islamization but neglected social spending. Musharraf built highways but ignored education reform. These choices looked impressive but left the foundations weak.
Does Ishrad Hussain see any hope for change?
Yes, cautiously. He argues Pakistan has great potential, a young population, strategic location, and natural resources.
But realizing this requires breaking free from dependency on conflict-driven rents. It needs consistent policies, better governance, and investment in people. Without these, the cycle will repeat.
So what reforms are needed to break the cycle?
Several. 1. Expand a tax base to include elites who avoid taxes. 2. Invest heavily in education and skills to build human capital. 3. Promote exports instead of relying on imports and aid. 4. Strengthen institutions so that policies survive beyond individual leaders. Most importantly, reduce conflict and normalize relations with neighbors to free resources for development.
What is the main conclusion of this chapter?
Hussein concludes that Pakistan's economic underperformance is not due to lack of resources, but due to choices shaped by conflict and authoritarianism. Wars drained funds, aid created dependency, and dictatorships prioritized short-term legitimacy over long-term reform. Democracy also failed to deliver because it remained fragile. Unless Pakistan invests in inclusive development and institutional reform, the costs of conflict and authoritarianism will continue to hold back its economic future.
And what does this mean for the people of Pakistan?
It means ordinary citizens pay the price. They suffer from poor schools, weak healthcare, unemployment, and inflation, while elites benefit from aid and privileges. The promise of Pakistan's economy will remain unfulfilled unless governance shifts from serving a few to serving the many. That, Hussein argues, is the real challenge.
Chapter 12. Pakistan's Foreign Policy. Internal Weaknesses and External Challenges. Why is Pakistan's foreign policy considered such a complicated and contested issue?
Because it's shaped by both internal weaknesses and external pressures. Unlike some countries that pursue foreign policy purely on national interests, Pakistan's domestic instability, military dominance, and identity politics all spill into its international relations. This means its diplomacy often reacts to crises rather than setting a consistent long-term vision.
What do you mean by internal weaknesses?
Pakistan has weak political institutions, unstable governments, and a fragile economy. These weaknesses limit its bargaining power abroad. For example, heavy dependence on foreign aid means foreign policy often follows the expectations of donors. Political instability at home also distracts leaders from crafting a coherent external strategy. The effect is inconsistency. Policies change with regimes, and long-term interests are ignored.
And what about the role of the military in foreign policy?
The military dominates security and foreign relations, especially with India, Afghanistan, the US, and even China. Civilian leaders have little say in these areas. This centralization makes policy heavily security-driven, often ignoring trade, culture, or soft diplomacy. The effect is a narrow vision, where survival and defense overshadow economic cooperation and regional integration.
So is the India factor the main driver of Pakistan's foreign policy?
Absolutely. India has been the defining lens since 1947. The unresolved Kashmir dispute, wars in 1948, 1965, and 1971, and ongoing border tensions keep India at the center of strategic thinking. The military sees India as an existential threat, and this perception dominates relations with all other countries. Even ties with the US and China are influenced by how they relate to India.
But doesn't this India-centric approach limit Pakistan's options?
It does. By focusing on countering India, Pakistan has missed opportunities for regional cooperation. Trade within South Asia remains minimal compared to other regions. Even when India and Pakistan attempted peace processes, domestic opposition and mistrust derailed them. The effect is isolation. Pakistan spends resources on defense rather than building economic partnerships with neighbors.
How does Afghanistan fit into this picture?
Afghanistan is another central concern. Pakistan's policy has been shaped by fears of Indian influence there. It supported Mujahideen during the 1980s jihad and later backed the Taliban. The goal was to have a friendly or at least not hostile government in Kabul. But this policy also fueled militancy at home. The effect is a double-edged sword. Pakistan gained leverage in Afghanistan, but also imported instability and global criticism.
What about relations with the United States?
They've been transactional. During the Cold War, Pakistan joined U.S.-led alliances like SEATO and CENTO for military aid. During the Afghan Jihad, it became Washington's frontline ally. After 9/11, it was again a key partner in the war on terror. But these partnerships were based on temporary interests, not trust. When American goals shifted, relations soured. The effect is a cycle of closeness and estrangement, which creates uncertainty.
And how has China been different?
China is Pakistan's most reliable partner. The relationship is described as all-weather friendship. Unlike the U.S., China doesn't interfere in Pakistan's domestic politics. Its support has been consistent, military, economic, and diplomatic. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, is a symbol of this. However, Pakistan's heavy reliance on China also limits its flexibility. It cannot balance easily between China and the West.
How does Pakistan manage relations with the Muslim world?
The Muslim world is an important part of Pakistan's foreign policy identity. Saudi Arabia and Gulf states have been crucial sources of aid, remittances, and energy supplies. Pakistan has also used Islamic identity to seek legitimacy and solidarity. But even here, tensions arise. For example, Pakistan refused to send troops to Yemen despite Saudi pressure, and this created friction. The effect is that Pakistan's Islamic identity helps diplomatically, but does not guarantee automatic support.
What role does Pakistan's economy play in its foreign relations?
A very large one. Economic weakness forces Pakistan to seek external bailouts from the IMF, Saudi Arabia, China, and others. This reduces foreign policy independence. Countries that provide financial help expect political alignment. For instance, U.S. aid often came with conditions about security policy. Economic fragility makes Pakistan more vulnerable to external influence.
How does internal politics affect foreign policy?
Deeply. Civil-military mistrust often creates contradictory signals abroad. Civilian governments may push for trade with India, but the military blocks it. Similarly, Parliament may call for better ties with neighbors, while security agencies pursue different strategies. This lack of unity weakens Pakistan's credibility internationally.
What about Pakistan's image in the world?
Unfortunately, it has been associated with instability, terrorism, and extremism. Even though Pakistan has suffered from terrorism itself, the perception is that it harbors militants. This damages its diplomatic standing, makes foreign investors hesitant, and complicates visa and trade agreements. The effect is reputational cost, which is hard to reverse.
Does Pakistan have strengths in foreign policy too?
Yes, its nuclear capability ensures it cannot be ignored strategically. Its location, linking South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, gives it geoeconomic importance. Its diaspora contributes remittances and lobbying influence abroad. And its close partnership with China gives it leverage. These strengths provide opportunities, but they need careful management.
What reforms or changes does Maliha Lodi suggest?
She emphasizes that Pakistan must broaden its foreign policy beyond security. Economic diplomacy, regional trade, and soft power should become priorities. Internally, stronger institutions and civilian authority are necessary to create consistent strategies. Without this, Pakistan will remain reactive, shaped by crises rather than shaping its own destiny.
So what is her main argument in this chapter?
Lodi argues that Pakistan's foreign policy failures cannot be blamed only on external enemies or hostile powers. Internal weaknesses, political instability, military dominance, and economic fragility are equally responsible. Unless Pakistan strengthens itself internally, it cannot navigate external challenges effectively.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's future?
It means foreign policy success depends on domestic reform. If Pakistan builds strong institutions, stable democracy, and a resilient economy, it can pursue independent and balanced relations. But if domestic weaknesses continue, foreign policy will remain trapped in cycles of dependency, insecurity, and missed opportunities.
Chapter 13: Pakistan and the United States, an incoherent relationship. Why does Shuja Nawaz describe Pakistan-U.S. relations as incoherent?
Because the relationship has never been steady or based on shared long-term goals. Instead, it has been transactional, full of ups and downs. The U.S. has seen Pakistan as useful in specific moments. Cold War alliances, Afghan jihad, war on terror. But once the immediate need passes, support evaporates. Pakistan, in turn, has expected long-term friendship while pursuing its own strategic aims. The result is constant mismatch, mistrust, and disappointment.
So the problem lies in different expectations.
Exactly. Pakistan views the U.S. as a strategic partner that should support it against India and help stabilize its economy. The U.S., however, sees Pakistan as a tactical ally to achieve temporary objectives, whether containing communism in the 1950s, fighting the Soviets in the 1980s, or targeting terrorists after 9/11. Once those goals are achieved, Washington reduces engagement, leaving Islamabad feeling abandoned.
Can you give an example from the early years?
In the 1950s, Pakistan joined U.S.-led alliances like SEATO and CENTO, hoping for protection against India. The U.S. provided military and economic aid, but it never gave Pakistan the guarantees it wanted. When the 1965 war with India broke out, Washington imposed arms embargoes on both countries. Pakistan felt betrayed, realizing the U.S. would not risk its global strategy for Pakistan's regional disputes.
What about the 1971 war?
That was another moment of disappointment. During the Bangladesh crisis, Pakistan expected full U.S. backing. Nixon and Kissinger did support Yahya Khan diplomatically because of Pakistan's role in opening U.S.-China relations, but they didn't intervene militarily to stop India. The U.S. tilt toward Pakistan wasn't enough to prevent dismemberment. For Islamabad, this reinforced the feeling that America is an unreliable partner.
Yet the 1980s looked like a high point in relations, right?
On the surface, yes. During the Afghan jihad, Pakistan became America's frontline ally. Billions of dollars in aid and weapons flowed in. The ISI and CIA worked closely to train mujahideen. But this was purely strategic. Once the Soviets withdrew, Washington quickly disengaged, imposing sanctions on Pakistan over its nuclear program. For Pakistan, it was another case of being used and then abandoned.
And then came 9/11, which changed everything again.
Yes. After 9/11, Pakistan was once more declared a major non-NATO ally. Musharraf pledged full support for the war on terror. Billions in aid came in, but with strict conditions. The U.S. wanted Pakistan to act against al-Qaeda and later the Taliban, while Islamabad selectively cooperated, pursuing militants that threatened itself, but tolerating those aligned with its Afghan strategy. This selective cooperation deepened mistrust.
So mistrust is a constant theme?
Absolutely. Washington accuses Pakistan of playing a double game, taking American aid while supporting militant groups. Pakistan, on the other hand, accuses the U.S. of demanding too much without respecting its sacrifices. Tens of thousands of Pakistanis died in terrorist attacks, yet Islamabad feels America never fully acknowledged its cost. The relationship is full of suspicion and blame.
How did the raid on Osama bin Laden affect the relationship?
It was a breaking point. In 2011, U.S. forces killed bin Laden in Abbottabad without informing Pakistan. For Washington, this proved Pakistan could not be trusted. For Pakistan, it was a humiliation that violated its sovereignty. The incident exposed the depths of mistrust and made cooperation extremely difficult afterward.
What about U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan's tribal areas?
They symbolize the asymmetry in the relationship. The U.S. argued drones were necessary to target terrorists. Pakistan officially condemned them, but quietly allowed some cooperation. Ordinary Pakistanis, however, saw them as violations of sovereignty and symbols of American arrogance. The effect was rising anti-American sentiment across society.
How does the U.S. view Pakistan compared to India?
Increasingly, Washington sees India as its natural strategic partner. India's large economy, democratic credentials, and rivalry with China make it attractive. Pakistan, by contrast, is seen as unstable, aid-dependent, and too close to China. This imbalance deepens Pakistan's fear of abandonment and fuels demands for continued U.S. aid and support.
And how does Pakistan view this U.S.-India tilt?
As a threat, Islamabad fears U.S. military cooperation with India strengthens its main rival. It expects Washington to play a balancing role, but that expectation is rarely met. Instead, U.S. pressure often falls on Pakistan, whether on nuclear policy, militancy, or democracy. This makes Pakistan feel cornered rather than supported.
Does the economy also play into this incoherent relationship?
Very much so. U.S. aid has been crucial at several points, but it always comes with strings attached. Pakistan relies on it, but resents the conditions. For instance, the Kerry-Lugar bill in 2009 promised billions in civilian aid, but military leaders rejected its conditions as interference. The effect is dependency mixed with resentment, which creates further incoherence.
How does China factor into all this?
China gives Pakistan a reliable partnership without lectures on democracy or governance. This contrasts with the U.S., which often ties aid to reforms. As U.S.-China rivalry grows, Pakistan leans closer to Beijing. This makes Washington even more skeptical, while Islamabad uses the China card as leverage. But it also risks Pakistan being trapped in great power competition.
Does Shuja Nawaz offer any way out of this incoherence?
He suggests that both sides need to reset expectations. The U.S. should stop expecting Pakistan to abandon its core security concerns overnight. Pakistan, in turn, must realize that America cannot and will not resolve its rivalry with India. Instead, the relationship should be based on limited but achievable cooperation, trade, education, counterterrorism, rather than illusions of a strategic partnership.
So what is his main conclusion in this chapter?
Nawaz concludes that incoherence comes from both sides. The U.S. has been inconsistent, embracing and abandoning Pakistan repeatedly. Pakistan, meanwhile, has relied too heavily on American aid while pursuing its own contradictory strategies. Unless both accept the limits of the relationship, the cycle of dependence and disappointment will continue.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's foreign policy?
It means Pakistan cannot rely on America as a permanent ally. It must diversify partnerships, strengthen its economy, and reduce reliance on external aid. At the same time, it needs to build credibility by aligning words with actions, especially on counterterrorism. Only then can it move from an incoherent to a more stable relationship with the United States.
Chapter 14, Pakistan, the Changing Regional and Global Context. Why does Stephen P. Cohen emphasize the changing context for Pakistan?
Because Pakistan's foreign and security policies are shaped not just by its own choices, but also by shifts in the regional and global environment. Over the decades, the Cold War, the Afghan Jihad, 9/11, and the rise of China have all created new challenges and opportunities. Pakistan's ability or inability to adapt to these changes determines its global standing.
Let's start with the Cold War. How did that shape Pakistan's role?
During the Cold War, Pakistan aligned itself with the United States and the West. It joined SEATO and CENTO, expecting protection against India. This gave Pakistan access to aid and weapons, but also made it dependent on Washington. When American priorities shifted, Pakistan felt abandoned. This pattern of reliance and disappointment was set early.
And after the Cold War ended?
The end of the Cold War brought new difficulties. The U.S. imposed sanctions over Pakistan's nuclear program.
Without the Soviet threat, Pakistan lost strategic importance in Washington's eyes. At the same time, regional instability in Afghanistan continued, with Pakistan deeply involved. Instead of peace dividends, Islamabad faced more insecurity and isolation.
How did 9/11 change the context again?
Dramatically, Pakistan became a frontline ally in the war on terror. Billions in aid flowed in, but so did pressure. The U.S. demanded action against militants, while Pakistan pursued a dual policy, helping America in some areas, but protecting groups useful for its regional strategy. This created global suspicion. The effect was short-term gains, but long-term reputational damage.
So, global terrorism shaped Pakistan's image.
Exactly. Pakistan came to be seen as both a victim and a sponsor of terrorism. On one hand, it suffered thousands of attacks. On the other, militant networks linked to its soil alarmed the world. This dual image complicated relations not just with the West, but also with neighbors like India and Afghanistan.
How has the rise of China changed the regional context?
The rise of China is perhaps the most significant recent shift. For Pakistan, China offers consistent military and economic support, symbolized by CPEC. As U.S.-China rivalry deepens, Pakistan positions itself as Beijing's closest partner. The effect is opportunity, investment, infrastructure, and security cooperation, but also risk. Pakistan risks becoming overly dependent on one power and being dragged into great power competition.
What about India's changing role globally?
India's rise as an economic power and strategic partner for the U.S. has altered South Asia's balance. Washington now sees New Delhi as central to countering China, while Pakistan struggles with instability and economic crises. This widens the gap. For Pakistan, India's growing global stature increases its sense of insecurity and fuels the military's dominance in policymaking.
And Afghanistan? How does the regional context there affect Pakistan?
Afghanistan has always been central. Pakistan has sought strategic depth there to counter India. The Taliban's return to power in 2021 gave Islamabad influence, but also new headaches. Terrorist groups operate across the border, and the international community remains skeptical. Instead of stability, Afghanistan continues to export insecurity into Pakistan's western borderlands.
What about relations with Iran?
Relations with Iran have been complex. While both share cultural ties, they often stand on opposite sides of regional rivalries, especially because of Pakistan's closeness to Saudi Arabia. U.S. sanctions on Iran further complicate things. For Pakistan, balancing between Tehran and Riyadh is a delicate act, and missteps can create domestic sectarian tensions.
How does Pakistan's economy influence its global context?
Strongly. Economic weakness undermines diplomatic independence. Pakistan often turns to the IMF, China, or Gulf states for bailouts, which limits foreign policy flexibility. Global players see Pakistan as unstable and risky, making investment scarce. In contrast, India's economic success strengthens its diplomatic position. This economic imbalance shifts the regional power equation.
Does Pakistan have any advantages in the changing global order?
Yes, its geography is a huge asset. Pakistan sits at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. If it manages stability, it can become a hub for trade and energy corridors. Its nuclear capability ensures it remains strategically relevant. And its young population, if educated and skilled, can become a driver of growth.
What weaknesses hold it back from using these advantages?
Internal instability, weak institutions, and an overemphasis on military solutions. Instead of leveraging geography for trade, Pakistan has often closed itself off because of security fears. Instead of investing in education and skills, it has prioritized defense. The effect is wasted opportunities, even as the global context shifts in its favor.
How does Pakistan's identity debate affect its global role?
Deeply, Pakistan defines itself partly in opposition to India and partly through Islamic identity. This identity-based lens limits flexibility in foreign policy. For instance, instead of pursuing pragmatic trade with India, identity politics blocks normalization. Similarly, over-reliance on Islamic solidarity often leads to disappointment when Muslim countries prioritize their own interests.
Does Cohen suggest Pakistan can change course?
Yes, but he warns it requires difficult choices. Pakistan must shift from a security-obsessed state to a development-focused one. It needs to invest in governance, trade, and education rather than expecting external powers to solve its problems. By doing so, it can adapt to the changing regional and global context rather than being shaped by it passively.
So, what is Cohen's main conclusion?
His conclusion is that Pakistan is at a crossroads in a rapidly changing world. If it continues old habits, overdependence on foreign powers, hostility with India, and prioritizing military over economy, it will fall further behind. But if it reforms internally and embraces regional cooperation, it can use its geography and strategic position to thrive. The choice is Pakistan's to make.
And what does this mean for ordinary Pakistanis?
It means their future depends on whether the state adapts wisely. If Pakistan invests in peace, trade, and human development, citizens can benefit from regional opportunities. If it remains trapped in conflict and dependency, ordinary people will keep paying the price through unemployment, inflation, and instability. The stakes are high, and the global context will not wait for Pakistan to catch up.
Chapter 15. Conclusion. Pakistan's multiple crossroads. Why does Jaffrelot describe Pakistan as standing at multiple crossroads?
Because Pakistan faces not just one challenge, but many interconnected ones: political, economic, social, and strategic. Each represents a choice that can lead towards stability and prosperity or deeper crisis and stagnation. The metaphor of crossroads shows that Pakistan is not trapped by fate, but by the decisions it makes in each area.
Let's start with politics. What is the political crossroads Pakistan faces?
Politically, the key choice is between strengthening democracy or continuing cycles of authoritarianism. For decades, military intervention has disrupted civilian governments. Democracy, though imperfect, offers inclusiveness and accountability, but it can only succeed if institutions are respected and strengthened. The effect is clear. Without political stability, no economic or social reform can take root.
And what about the economy? What crossroads does it face there?
The economy is at a decisive point. Pakistan must choose between dependency on aid and genuine self-reliance. For too long, it has relied on foreign loans, remittances, and strategic rents. The alternative is to broaden the tax base, promote exports, and invest in human capital. If it fails, economic fragility will keep pulling it back. If it succeeds, the young population and geographic position could turn into assets.
How does the rise of China and India affect these crossroads?
It complicates them. China offers Pakistan partnership through CPEC, but also risks dependency. India's rise makes Pakistan insecure, reinforcing old habits of military focus. At this crossroad, Pakistan must decide whether to compete endlessly or find areas of cooperation. The regional context is shifting quickly, and Pakistan cannot afford to stand still.
Does Jaffrelot see internal reform as the key to all these crossroads?
Yes. His argument is that external alliances or temporary aid cannot solve Pakistan's problems. The real solutions lie in domestic reform, strengthening democracy, investing in people, improving governance, and rethinking the role of religion in politics. Without internal change, external support will only postpone crises.
So what is his overall assessment of Pakistan's journey so far?
He sees it as a story of missed opportunities. At many points, after independence, after wars, after democratic transitions, Pakistan's had chances to reform. But short-term thinking, elite interests, and external distractions led to repeated cycles of hope and disappointment. Yet, Jaffrelot insists Pakistan is not doomed. The crossroads metaphor suggests there are still paths forward.
And what role does the military play in this conclusion?
A decisive one. The military remains Pakistan's most powerful institution, shaping not only security,
but also politics and the economy. For Pakistan to move forward, the military must redefine its role, supporting democracy rather than dominating it. Without this shift, other reforms will remain limited.
How about the youth of Pakistan? Do they feature in his vision?
Absolutely. Pakistan has a young population, which is both a challenge and an opportunity. If educated and empowered, this youth can drive innovation, growth, and reform. If neglected, they may fuel unemployment, extremism, and unrest. The youth are central to which road Pakistan ultimately takes.
Does Jaffrelot offer optimism for Pakistan's future?
Cautious optimism. He acknowledges the difficulties, conflict, authoritarianism, weak institutions, but he also highlights resilience. Pakistan has survived wars, crises, and sanctions. Its civil society, media, and youth continue to push for change. At each crossroad, there remains the possibility of choosing better paths.
So what is the main message of his conclusion?
The main message is that Pakistan's destiny is not fixed. It stands at multiple crossroads, and the direction it takes depends on leadership, institutions, and society's choices. If it clings to old patterns, military dominance, external dependence, ideological rigidity, it risks stagnation. If it chooses reform, pluralism, and regional cooperation, it can unlock its true potential.
And what does this mean for the ordinary citizen?
It means that everyday struggles, unemployment, inflation, insecurity, are tied to these bigger crossroads. When leaders choose short-term survival over reform, ordinary people pay the price. But if Pakistan takes the path of stability, democracy, and economic reform, the benefits will reach households, schools, and communities. The stakes are deeply personal.
Finally, how does Jaffrelot want readers to understand Pakistan?
He wants them to see Pakistan not just as a troubled state, but as a country full of potential caught in difficult choices. Its challenges are real, but so are its opportunities. The crossroads metaphor invites both Pakistanis and the world to recognize that the future is open, dependent on the decisions made today.